Okay, so today we're going to move on to tissues. So we're starting to look at the different aspects of what is in a plant and how they function. Some of these tissues we talked a little bit about whenever we did notes with angiosperms, so you will see some familiar terms. Most plants have 3 or 4 groups of organs, and we consider the roots, stems, leaves, and flowers the organs of a plant. They don't have, hearts, livers, lungs, things like that, but these are the basic parts that they need in order to survive. Each organ group is composed of 1 or more types of tissues, same as you. Tissues are groups of cells performing a similar function, which you would have talked about way back in your 9th grade year of biology. This is like basic stuff here. Tissues are classified by their origin, structure, or their function. So you have heart tissue, and that heart tissue has a different function than your lung tissue does, and that has a different function than your stomach tissue does, or your liver tissue. Each one is specified for the parts of the plant or the part of the body that it is assigned to. There are 3 basic tissue patterns in roots and stems. We have woody dicots, herbaceous dicots, and monocots, and you're hearing those terms again now for the second time. Higher level plants have specific types of cells associated with each tissue, so they just get more specific as they go. And pardon the bell system there. You'll hear another one in about 2 minutes, I think. Meristems are permanent regions of growth found in plants where cells actively divide. New cells are typically small. They have 6-sided box-like structures with a proportionately large nucleus and small or no vacuoles. As cells mature, they assume many shapes and sizes, and the vacuoles grow to occupy about 90% of the cell's volume. So the main organelle within each cell is going to be that vacuole. That's because they need to be able to store a lot of water. Plants, they can't just go to the faucet and get a drink of water whenever they want one, or they can't go find a stream and drink out of it. They are solely dependent on the rain, or if it's a houseplant, hopefully you water them. Types of meristems include apical, lateral, and intercalvary. So let's start with the apical meristems. Meristematic tissues are found at or near the tips of roots and shoots, which increases in length as the apical meristems produce new cells. This is for primary growth, and there are 3 primary meristems, as well as embryo leaves and buds that develop from here. And I'm probably going to butcher some of these words, but we'll do the best we can here. The protoderm, the ground meristem, and the procambium. They produce tissues called the primary tissues. So over here, these are going to be the primary meristems, this group right in here. Lateral meristems. These produce tissues that increase the girth of the roots and stems, so they're growing outward. They're getting wider, in other words. This is going to be secondary growth. So we have a vascular cambium. This is going to produce secondary tissues that function primarily in support and conduction. It's going to extend through roots and stems in perennial and many annual plants. It's thin and cylindrical, brick-shaped cells, and it's responsible for girth, or width. Cork cambium is the other type. It's a thin cylindrical type of tissue that runs the length of the roots and stems in woody plants, and it lies outside vascular cambium and inside the outer bark, which it produces. Intercalvary meristems are found in grasses and related plants. They develop at intervals along stems, and it adds to the stem length. In the vicinity of the nodes, these are leaf attachment areas. So this is a node, and this is basically a period of growth. So at the end of a growing season, it would stop right here. And if you actually look at some of your plants, if it is a perennial plant that comes back, you'll be able to see where the nodes are. Tissues produced by meristems. There are cells produced by meristems, and they assume various shapes and sizes related to their functions as they develop and mature. Simple tissues consist only of 1 kind of cell, which can be parenchyma, collenchyma, or sclerenchyma. Complex tissues consist of 2 to several kinds of cells, which are the xylem and the phloem. So let's start with the simple tissues first. This is the most abundant plant cell type. It's found in all major parts of higher plants. It's spherical in shape and when first formed, but it takes on various shapes and sizes due to them pushing against each other. The majority have 14 sides. That is a lot of sides, guys. And they have really large vacuoles. They can contain starch grains, oils, tannins, crystals, and other secretions. Here's some types of parenchyma cells. We have the arenchymal, which is a parenchymal cell with an extensive network of connected air spaces between the cells. For example, water lilies and other aquatic plants would need to have air spaces in their cells. It's going to keep them lifted up so that they don't submerge too much in the water. And chlorenchyma, which are parenchyma cells that contain a lot of chloroplasts. So these are going to be found in the leaves, and it's the function for photosynthesis. Parenchyma cells without chloroplasts function mostly in food or water storage. So this is going to be most fruits and vegetables. We have transfer cells, which are parenchymal cells that develop irregular extensions of the inner wall that greatly increase surface area of the plasma membrane. It's found in the necrotaries of flowers and carnivorous plants. So this is where the bugs would go to get the nectar or the pollen, where they would go to feast, basically. They play a role in transferring dissolved substances between cells. Many live for a long time. Some cacti can live for over 100 years. Mature parenchyma cells can divide long after they are produced by a meristem. And when cut, parenchyma cells divide and give rise to new roots. So you could actually cut a plant in half and plant the part that you cut, and it would grow roots. And the next type of cell is the collenchyma cells, and these have living cytoplasm and may live for a long time. The walls are generally thicker and more uneven in thickness, so you might have one side really thick, the other side not so thick. It occurs just beneath the epidermis. Typically, they are longer than they are wide, and the walls are pliable but strong. They provide flexible support for growing organs and mature organs, such as leaves and floral parts. For example, the strings in celery are collenchyma cells, which sounds kind of gross, I realize that, but that's a really good example. The next one is a sclerenchyma. This consists of cells that have thick, tough secondary walls, normally impregnated with lignin structural materials. Most are dead at maturity in function and support, and there are two types. We have the sclerids, which are the stone cells. They may be randomly distributed in other tissues, for example, the skin of pears or the hardness of nuts and peach pits. And there's also the fibers, which may be found in association with a number of different tissues in the roots, stems, leaves, and fruits. It contains a tiny cavity called the lumen in the center, and there's 40 different families of plants. We have the textile goods, ropes, string, and canvas. You really don't normally think of those as being plants, but they are. Next is the complex tissues. This consists of two or more types of cells. Some are produced by apical meristems, but most are produced by the vascular cambium. It's an important component of the plumbing and storage systems of a plant, and it moves water from the roots to the shoots. It's chief conducting tissue throughout all organs for water and minerals absorbed by the roots. It consists of a combination of parenchymal cells, fibers, vessels, tracheids, and ray cells, which we didn't talk about those yet. Vessels are long tubes composed of individual cells called vessel elements that are open at each end. Think of a straw. Tracheids are dead at maturity and have relatively thick secondary walls with tapered ends that overlap each other. These are areas where no secondary wall material has been deposited. So pits, for example, would allow water to pass from cell to cell. Cone-bearing plants and other non-flowering plants, their xylem is composed almost entirely of these tracheids, and most of the conduction through the xylem is upward, but sometimes it can move laterally, which means sideways. It does not go down. If you did that reading yesterday, it would have told you that as well. Xylem, its main function is going up. In this case, it can also go sideways, does not go down. The last type of cells that I mentioned were rays. They are long-lived parenchymal cells that are produced in horizontal rows. It's the site of lateral conduction, and they radiate from the center of the stems and roots in woody plants. The phloem consists of dissolved food materials, primarily sugars, which are produced by photosynthesis, and it moves the sugar up and down. It's composed mostly of two types of cells without secondary walls. Sieve tube members are relatively large and cylindrical and laid end-to-end they form more sieve tubes. Sieve plates are porous regions of sieve tubes, and companion cells are narrower, they're more tapered, they're closely associated with the sieve tube members. It's derived from the parent cells of cambium. So sieve tubes. Hold on one second, guys. Okay, so getting back to talking about sieve tubes. These are members that have no nuclei at maturity, even though their cytoplasm is very active in the conduction of food materials in solution throughout the plant. Callose is a polymer found in sieve tubes. It's found in living sieve tube members that stays in the solution as long as the cell contents are under pressure. Epidermis, you guys have an epidermis as well. It's just your outermost layer of skin. In plants, it's a protective layer of cells in all young plant organs. It's subject to modification by the environment due to direct contact. It is usually one thick cell. The stomata has openings that allow gas exchange and water evaporation surrounded by guard cells. Cutin is a fatty substance secreted by epidermal cells on the surface of the outer wall. The thickness determines how much water is lost through the cell walls by evaporation. So the thicker it is, the less water the plant will lose. And the cuticle is a protective layer formed by the cutin. It is resistant to bacteria and other disease organisms. I believe this is where we're going to be ending here soon with the periderm. Consists of outer bark and is primarily composed of somewhat rectangular and box-like cork cells, which are dead cells. Cytoplasm still functions in cork cells, and it secretes a fatty substance called suberin. It makes cork cells waterproof, and it helps protect xylem, phloem, and other tissues. Replaces sloughed-off epidermis in woody plants after the cork cambium begins producing new tissues that increase the girth of the stem and root. Lenticles are pockets of loosely arranged parenchyma cells that do not contain suberin and protrude through the surface of the periderm. Functions in gas exchange between the air and interior of the stems. Oops, we're not done yet. Secretory cells and tissues. Secretory cells may function individually or as part of a secretory tissue. It's derived from parenchyma. It can occur in a wide variety of places in the plant, and the most common types secrete nectar in flowers, oils in citrus, mint, and other types of leaves. Mucilage in the glandular hairs of insect trapping plants, which sounds kind of gross. It makes the legs basically stick. It's like sticky paper. Latex in several plant families, and resins in coniferous plants. And I do have a video that goes along with this particular slide. I will add the link to your Canvas page. That was the last slide. All right, so there's your notes for that. Make sure you watch the video that we're going to go through, and that is all that I have for you today, guys. All right, have a wonderful day.